Welcome to the Trailblazers. I'm your host, Perry Rarick. The purpose of the Trailblazers is to share with you interesting and thought-provoking discussions I have with trailblazing business leaders. They're innovative, they're experts at what they do, and they're not afraid to challenge the status quo when it makes sense and meaningful things are at stake. My trailblazer guest today is Joseph Carleone. He is an acclaimed business leader with over 45 years, I'm not stuttering, 45 years of executive experience spanning a number of sectors, including aerospace, defense, chemical, pharmaceutical, food, and cosmetics. He has held leadership roles with Aerojet General Corporation and American Pacific Corporation, serving as chairman and CEO during a pivotal transition from public to private ownership. He has recently served as chairman at Avid Bioservices, and he is lead director at Sentient Technologies. Joe has earned a number of honors. He's earned them, including the Drexel 100 and the College of Engineering Alumni Circle distinction. And he and his wife established the Joseph and Shirley Carleone Endowed Fellowship Fund at Drexel to assist PhD students. Joe, I am honored to have you with us today. Welcome to the Trailblazers.
Thank you, Perry, and thank you for that kind introduction. It's certainly my pleasure to be here.
Well, this is going to be a very interesting conversation for our guests. Hang on to your seats. This is going to be, it's filled with keepers, those things you're going to want to hang on throughout your lives. Joe developed over a course of time, or a period of time, he developed a program of instruction, a course on business leadership, and he authored the book Touchstones of Leadership, which I have a copy of. I highly recommend it. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit. Leadership, business leadership specifically, is the topic of our discussion today. And Joe, you speak about leadership with sage-like wisdom, but in a very practical way that's very easy to understand. So I want to begin with an analogy you use, a model, a framework that you use for business leadership, and that is the house, the homes we live in. Would you share that with us?
Absolutely, Perry. After much research, as well as my own experiences and watching leaders over my career, I felt we really needed a model that would, and a simplified model that would allow us to understand the most important aspects of leadership. And what emerged from that was the model of a house. When you think of a house has a foundation which supports the entire structure. And then the structure gives the house form, and then it's capped off with a roof or top of some sort to tie it all together, as well as to protect it and bring it all into focus. So the house of leadership also has a foundation, and that foundation is the ability to manage oneself. And the concept here is, if you can't manage yourself, it's very difficult to lead others in that in business. The structure of the house of leadership gives it form as well, and that form is composed of interpersonal skills as well as management skills, and that forms the structure. And then the roof, to tie it all together, is strategy and organizational alignment. So that's the fundamental components, the four basic components of the house of leadership.
That's brilliant. I love it. To your point, it's simple, it's memorable. Everybody knows that. It's very just incredible stuff. Okay, I'd like you to walk through each of those and unpack them a little bit so we can understand a little bit more, beginning with that foundation that you described.
Yes, managing oneself. is extremely important. And the fundamental tenets are you want to become trustworthy. And the way to become trustworthy is to build character and competence. You trustworthiness is tied to both of those. You can't trust someone if they're not basically a good person, good character, as well as competent in whatever their role is in the organization. One without the other doesn't build trust. And then the other aspect of managing oneself is ongoing professional development. Uh, Improvement must begin with yourself. And the idea here is to build upon your strengths. Now, as we move to the structure, um, interpersonal skills. Interpersonal skills are basically tied to relationships. You must take the responsibility for building those relationships. And the understanding is that trust is the foundation of effective relationships. So the idea is to listen, listen, and listen. And as you listen, try to understand the feelings of the person from what they're trying to express. And if you can do that, whether you agree with them or not, you can take that debate up later, but initially they need to feel that you feel what they feel. So it's that empathetic listening.
Yeah.
And then moving to the more concrete aspects of leadership are the management skills. Now, some people say, leaders and managers are different people. And I think that's not exactly true. Um, I think leading and managing are the activities that leaders have to develop and promote throughout the organization. One with you really can't divorce one without the and you really can't divorce the two of them. Um, and so um, when you manage, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with assigning people to certain tasks and all of that, and it's very important to define and understand their talents, because what I found, and I think many of my colleagues have found, that the reason people fail or don't perform well in their jobs is that they're in the wrong job. You haven't matched their talents, which is inborn, with the task at hand. So it's important to understand talents. And the way I like to define talent is it's a recurring behavior, thought, or feeling that can be productively applied. A recurring behavior, thought, or feeling that can be productively applied. And just as an example, people who are very, very detail oriented, everything has to be in its place, every I dotted and T crossed, become excellent accountants. Um, and but they're probably not the strategic planners, the visionaries. But we need all these talents in an organization. And another example comes from the medical industry, nurses. Nurses, the best nurses, and this was established through a lot of data from Gallup, are those that really care about people. You hear that nurses need to be cold and so forth, and not get involved with their patients. Gallup's study from many years ago showed that that's not true. The best nurses are the ones that truly care about their people in general and their patients. And then the other aspect of management skills is the team, your team wants you to teach them what you know. So the idea is to dare to teach. Um, and an old expression is those who dare to teach never cease to learn. And so that's the structure, the interpersonal skills and the management skills. And we need to think of them as activities and not people.
Yeah.
And then finally, the strategy part and the
Before
organization.
you go to strategy, I
Yeah.
hate to slow you down here,
No,
but
no,
man,
no, that's fine.
this is wonderful stuff. I want to go back to how you described how you define talent. Finding talent in somebody. You know, we're overwhelmed with I don't mean to criticize HR professionals, but you know, we're going to test people, we're going to find their psychological profile. You know, we're going to spend hours and hours trying to define this, but I love the simplicity and understandability of what you said. Can you say it again? And how you go about doing that. Just it's just brilliant.
Well, the definition that I stated before, I'll repeat. It's a recurring behavior, thought, or feeling that can be productively applied. And that's the key. So there are those things that are inborn, and they typically can't be taught.
Yeah.
They typically can't be taught. Skills can be taught. So that's why it's important to define the two, and and um, as you move forward, identifying uh, which people to put where in the organization.
Yeah.
Some people are very another. We talked about the accountant being detailed. Another detailed organization is quality. If you're in the manufacturing business, the quality people are those that leave no stone unturned, and that product is going to go out well. If it, but you don't want to put a person that is extremely extroverted and likes to go out to all these functions, put them in charge of quality. Not that they're bad people, but it just doesn't lend their talents don't lend themselves to doing that job. um, so you don't want to put the head of R&D in charge of quality, and you don't want to put the head of quality, the typical head of quality, in charge of R&D, right? Because it just doesn't work.
I love that definition, and your examples are really meaningful. That's very good. So, sorry for pumping the brakes. I thought that was
No, no.
worthwhile going through that again. And please go on with the strategic perspective.
Strategy is so important to the business, and strategy is about choosing often choosing what not to do. There are so many things, and you have so much capability in your organization, and you find uh, people not being able to focus on a strategy, and many companies fail or don't do well because they get into too many things before they establish the ability to do something really, really well. So the idea is choosing what not to do, based on the industry, the profitability of the industry, and so forth. And then being different. So those two things are really important. Choose what not to do, and then be different. How can you be different? Do I have a different technology that can give me a competitive advantage? Do I have an interesting supply chain idea that will differentiate me from my competitor? And those kinds of things. Do I have a way to get into the market that's different? So whatever it is, you need to establish some type of differentiation. And one of the things that is very important when you're developing a strategy is focus on the customer. Many people think going into a competition, developing a strategy is like going to war with your competitor, and that is a failing approach. Trying to crush your competitor is not what you're doing in business. What you're doing in business is you're competing for profits. You're competing for customers. You're not looking to crush the other guy. And then, of course, assuming your competitor will fail is a completely losing strategy. You can't build success on the failure of others. And so that's the whole thing about strategy. And then you have to align the entire workforce to that strategy. And this is where you need to communicate it. So the strategy has to be simple enough and clear enough that you can communicate it not only to the executive staff, not only to the first line management, but to every person in the organization needs to understand that. There's an old story that comes out of aerospace. I haven't I haven't checked on its veracity, but it's some um, high political official uh, was uh, reviewing NASA at the at one of the space centers. I don't remember which. And he was walking around. There was a janitor cleaning up and so forth. And uh, he walked over to the janitor and introduced himself and said, "What what do you do here? What's the nature of your job?" And the janitor looked up at him and said, "We put people into space." you know, and he knew the mission, he knew the vision, he knew what the job was at the top level, and he knew that his little part of making things right in his role helped that particular mission. He didn't, say, what he expected. Well, I clean up over here and I go here and I go into the administrator's office and do this. So it's interesting to get people to know the mission, the vision, and the strategy in simple terms that you can relate to everyone in the organization to get
Awesome.
them aligned.
That is really valuable. I started off by saying this is conversation is going to be full of keepers, and I lost count. I think we have a dozen of them there. This is so much value. Just a great model and analogy. I love the simplicity, and simplicity is easy to remember. So it's just a great model. I want to transition a bit. I had mentioned in your introduction that you've been in leadership roles for 45 years. In 45 years, you've experienced a lot of change, but you also led and managed change. And I would like you to get to talk a little bit about that and both the art and science of change management. I think it's vitally important because nothing ever remains the same. So, do you mind? Can you share some of your thoughts on that with us?
I think that's a great question and a really important aspect of business. And as we go forward, more and more things seem to change faster and faster and faster. So you have to keep up with it. So you have to have a process to develop that. Nothing really stays constant, and you can never assume that you can just coast along and keep doing things the way you've been doing, or you really become obsolete if you do that. So change is important, and the idea of change is all about communication. And the first aspect is the leadership. I'm not talking just the CEO, but the leadership at various levels needs to establish trust. We talked about trust on the interpersonal skills. First, there has to be a significant amount of trust so that as people um, are being asked to change their process, to change the way they're doing things, from in any capacity, that they will trust the leader is telling them why this is happening, and they believe that this is happening for a good cause and to keep things going. So it's that aspect of trust that's really important, and communication of the reasons for change, why we're going in this direction, whether it's a business reason or a regulatory reason. As we deal as again in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, that I've been involved with for quite some time. Regulations continue to change, continue to move up, um, and people need to be willing to accept those changes. And sometimes things are moving so fast you don't get a chance to give every little detail of why we're changing, and those then this is where the trust comes in that you have built along the way, that, okay, I'm willing to believe you and we can explain details later. But today we've got to move into this new role. And then in manufacturing, if you're in a manufacturing company, it's also very important as we move, as you know, as we move from traditional methods of manufacturing to more team-based manufacturing and so forth. So we'll see that. So that I think it's all change is all about communication and keeping people informed. Take their ideas. We talked about empathy before. That's all important and all builds into change that is really important.
How do you change is going to feel too fast at times. It could become reckless, but you want to move at the quickest pace possible. How did you get a sense of, yeah, we're moving at the right pace? We can pick it up a little bit. Maybe we need to slow down a little bit, communicate a little bit more. How did you get that sense?
Well, it's difficult because you're moving into unknown areas and you don't know exactly how long it's going to take to get some of these things done. But this is where the management skills part of it, where the leader has to, bring people in and ask them, how long is it going to take to do this? What do you think about this? Ask all the right questions. And one of the tools that we've always used is to plan from, as I like to call it, plan from right to left. In other words, we want to have all of these new quality reforms in place by XYZ date. That's our goal. Now, let's back up and say, okay, what's the milestone just before that? And then what's the milestone just before that? What's the milestone? So you break up these milestones and then say, okay, how long is it going to take us to do this? And, your first cut may not be right. And then you start moving again. And you may have to move your desired date a bit. But, um, you've got to be able to um, manage as the leader of the organization to understand how long it's going to take to do these things and have a gut feel of how that all happens. Because let's face it, when you ask people to sign up to a date, they're probably going to pad the schedule a little bit, right? And they want to hit the date, and you've got to be able to take and then if you have 10 things with 10 different managers doing it, and everyone puts in so many weeks padding in there, but you never meet the date that you want. So you've got to be able to question. And this is why I say leaders also have to be managers because there's no one else. And it may not be the CEO, but it might be, COO or one of the other high level executives that needs to, invoke those management skills because they've been through it themselves and they know how this all works to say, now, wait a minute, let's look at this point. What can we do here? Maybe we can make this shorter by using this other technology. And now with AI coming into the world, who knows what we're going to be able to do, you know. Of course, you've got to be, as you know, you've got to be careful with AI because I just read an article, I think it was a Harvard article, that AI now, because people aren't mature in using it, is creating a lot of rework and it's actually taking people longer because they find so many mistakes in the AI report. They've got to go back in and correct everything. So you've got to be really careful of how to use these new tools, but I digress a bit. But that's the basic thing. I think as you're managing change, you got to put a realistic schedule in place that everyone agrees is possible, and that's the only way to maintain that trust.
Joe, you once told me easy problems should not be getting to you, and you were talking about the executive level. Easy problems should not be getting up to the executive level. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think if people in the front lines are doing their job, and you've uh, put the right culture in place where they're not fearful about making these rather direct decisions, and they know that you've backed them and you've given them the authority to do this, then if that's the nature of your organization, these easier problems, challenges, issues, whatever you want to call them, should not get all the way up to the CEO, for example. In other words, if it does, then somebody there's not doing their job, and they're not taking the responsibility. And this is where you've probably got wrong people in some of those roles. And this is where you got to come in, assess the talents, see who's where, and make some changes in the organization.
It's all interconnected. I love it. It's completely interconnected the way you look at that. And houses are too. So I want to go back to where we started, where you started. You spoke about the importance of a foundation in this house model of leadership. And CEOs, executives are busy folks. They're, in spite of it, they're isolated quite a bit. I think you referred to them as the loneliness of the CEO job. I think other people have said, when you're that busy, how do you find time to work on yourself, like you described, and how did you do it?
I mean, that's a very important question because, as I said in the beginning of managing oneself, self-improvement is so important. So how do you keep up? How do you keep sharpening the saw, as Stephen Covey says, right? How do you keep up to speed on the new developments and so forth, so that you can guide the organization? And I think you've got to take some time aside and put some time aside purposely to think quietly and think through all the issues, think through the strategy. Am I on the right course? What do I need to do? Think about the organization, think about the talents of the people, and so forth. And that's so important. I mean, there are other things important. I don't want to, I think they're every human being has four fundamental aspects, right? A physical aspect, a mental aspect, a social aspect, and a spiritual aspect. And you got to work on all of them. But let's take, for right now, the more mental aspects of leading the organization. What I used to do is, uh, since I like to be, do my best thinking early in the morning, I used to try to get in about an hour before all the activity really started, and spend that hour thinking, maybe reading something that I found that I wanted to bone up on, or learn about. Um, Review the strategic plan again, because so many times you make the strategic plan and it goes in the drawer, and you don't see it until next year when you dust it off and say, okay, now I got to put a new one together. So those kinds of things. So that's how I did it, is to take that time. But you've got to have that time, and then you can also use that time to think about what you may have a mentor that you want to ask questions, and they may not be available early in the morning, so you list the questions and then maybe catch up with them in the evening or something like that. And good mentors are really important. That's the loneliness aspect. There are certain things, as you're thinking through them, it's inappropriate to share those thoughts until you've actually concluded what you want to say. So you need to test the waters. So you test with people who are outside the organization, who can be very frank with you. You're not under they're not under your employ, so you don't control their raise, you don't control their bonus, and so forth. So and so you get really good feedback, and say, hey, Joe, you're in the wrong quadrant here. Think about this, think about that, think about that. And very often they'll bring your vector back to the right direction again. So those people are really important.
Such good advice. But important thing, take the time. You said that several times as you were explaining that. You got to take the time. So
Yeah, no matter how busy you are, that's got to come up on the priority list as, okay, I got to do this, and find what else you need to push to a little later.
yeah. Before we conclude, Joe, I want to talk about your book. So I bought your book a while back, and I you have it has an interesting origin story. The title of the book, "The Touchstones of Leadership." You authored it. You wrote every word of it. And can you talk about well, kind of go back. How did you find time to do it? And what is the origin story of this book and everything that's in it?
Well, I'll start with the origin first, and that'll tell you about the timing aspect. I got into the habit quite a few years ago of in staff meetings, in program reviews, in strategy reviews, and so forth, of uh, throwing out one-liners that to make a specific point in our discussions. And I would do this, quite frequently when appropriate. And these would be things that I picked up somewhere, a famous quote by a famous person, um, or just something I made up on the spot. And one of my staff, one of my senior staff, who eventually became a successor of mine in one of my roles, um, said, you should write these things down. In fact, he liked one so much that he and put it on a poster and got it framed and handed it to me that I had up on my wall. So I took his advice and I started writing them down. And then after a number of years, more than 10, I took out the list and I called it out to the ones I thought were, most appropriate. And started to think about each one, the implications of each one, how each one could be interpreted different ways by different people and so forth. And that's when I decided we needed a model, and what emerged was the house model, because they needed to organize these, came up with 45 of them, and had to organize these into something rational so we could discuss them. And that was the genesis of the course. I took all those notes and the house model and all of this, and developed a series of PowerPoint slides and created a course that I gave to some senior leadership teams. And then from there, I said, well, actually, someone suggested in one of the courses, are you writing a book on this? And I said, well, maybe I will. And I started, wrote a paragraph here and a paragraph about each one. I wrote up each one, and I started to do that. And it took quite some time because I wasn't, really super dedicated to it. I was doing a lot of other things. And then I got to a point and said, just like running a business, I've got to put a plan together. So I pulled out, you know, an Excel chart, and I laid out, okay, I need to finish this by this date, and this by this date, and this by this date, and I need to find a publisher and all of that. So I laid out the plan, and I tried to hit the plan by, working on weekends and evenings and things like that to put the book together, and it came together eventually. But I just point out I had to put the plan together. Without
Yep.
that, it was so it, again, comes back to those management skills. Well, it's a book on leadership. I had to lay it out, and then I would pull that schedule out and say, "Gee, I'm behind a couple of weeks. I better pick it up." So that was the genesis of how it all happened, and so that's how I made time for it.
Yeah. Awesome. I don't know how other people are reading this, but each of these, the 45 touchstones, I read them. It's like, to your point, I like to get up early and I like some thinking time, reading time. I try to just contemplate things. So I've taken to reading one of those touchstones per day. That's how I start my day. I'm partway through. I'll finish it, but it feels spiritual to me as I read through these. So it's very good. I highly recommend it. So I know where I got mine, but what's a good way to get a copy of the book if somebody's interested?
Well, Amazon, clearly Amazon. There's been a lot of reviews on Amazon and so forth. If you want to get some background, and I think they'll let you read a few pages and so forth. So Amazon is um, um, very well known for this as and Barnes and Noble, either online or in their stores. Um, Target also has it, but Amazon, Barnes and Noble are probably the best sources.
Okay,
And
great stuff. The title again is The Touchstones of Leadership, Joseph Carleone, and it's just a great read. I recommend it for everybody. How can folks get a hold of you directly, Joe?
the best way is to go to my website, josephcarleone.com. That's, Joseph, Carleone, all one word. And remember, it's CAR. Some people spell it COR, and you won't get there that way. Carleone, all one word.com. There's a contact page where you can write me a message and get it directly. And there's also an email if you prefer to go direct email rather than to go through the contact page. But the contact page will probably get to me faster if you
Okay.
if you
Well, Joe,
and you
thank
can
you very
also
much.
look me up on LinkedIn if you wish as well.
That's how we found each other. We
Yeah,
connected on LinkedIn some time
right.
ago. That's a good way, and that's how I became aware of your book as well. So thanks for that. My guest today has been Joseph Carleone, 45 plus years of executive experience, author of the book, The Touchstones of Leadership. Get yourself a copy and do yourself a huge favor. Spend some time each day working on yourself by reading this book. Joe, thank you for being with the Trailblazers today.
It was truly my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me.